being really when weather permits. They are going to go ahead with the left turn only approach in both directions. All that requires is painting some stuff on the road and re-signalizing the intersection, and it's a very minor cost. You know, the only dollar figure they said is less than 50,000. I sense it's a lot less. So it's really just the weather. They can't do that in the winter. You have to restripe the road when it'll stick. They did throw a little bit of a caution out there that that's the plan today. If enough emergencies happen, there's only so much money until the bond bill is passed the Senate. It's passed the House, but until it passes the Senate, there is a chance that they will not be able to do that in the spring if enough emergencies happen between today and the spring. So they just wanted to make sure we threw that out there.
Definition of emergency?
Other towns that have crises that happen for whatever the reason. This is a high hazard intersection, but it's not an emergency.
Yep.
Whatever their definition of that is. So I'm pretty optimistic that we're on their radar scope. We, as I mentioned, we discussed a lot of different projects. A group of us have to go back there probably in 2 weeks to talk about the Main Street diet that I was mentioning to you. So we'll definitely be in front of the board on some of these other issues, and I believe they'll join us. In terms of this specific project, that's the short-term fix, is the spring, and I wish it had happened in the fall, but it didn't happen in the fall. Longer term, in this bond bill as it's currently written, Representative Jones has added $1.5 million, and I don't know the technical term for it. It could be called an earmark, but I don't think it has quite the full weight of an earmark. There's $1.5 million designated for this project in the bond bill, but as I understand that, that's more like a footnote that there's a project that exists and $1.5 million might put a dent in some of the longer term work that's needed. But even if the bond bill is approved as written, it doesn't actually fund that project. It just reminds everyone there's more projects mentioned in the bond bill than there will be funding. So it's somewhat of a placeholder, somewhat like the TIP program. Longer term, they're talking about things like land taking and changing the intersection significantly in terms of changing the visibility by digging down. So it's fairly expensive work. All of us in the table, me being the least expert, believe that this short-term fix that Fred and some others mentioned many moons ago may take care of the whole situation. Realistically, the longer-term fix is years away. It's not going to happen next fall or in the next year, most likely. And honestly, if they put in a new traffic flow, as it were, in April or May, I would assume we'd all want to study it for a while before we went spending millions of dollars to reconfigure the intersection.
Right.
So they did assure us that the work that would be done on a temporary basis would not be money thrown away if there was some other solution needed. And the other part of this that they're going to attempt to accomplish, I learned there's lots of buckets of money and it's very complicated. They're going to attempt to solve the handicap accessibility and the crosswalk issue up there. So there's a couple different options, and we'll let them decide, which the best one is for them. But the main idea was there's a crossing guard up there for the end of school at the end of the day, especially not so much the morning. Kids cross, and it's not easy to cross to get to the ice cream place. So you really need a crosswalk across Main and then across the other road there. And that's, again, to be determined as to what the best path for that is. But they thought they would tackle that at the same time.
The same time as these short-term?
As the short-term
Good.
fixes,
Good.
yeah. So that they'd have a lot of work going on up there at once. And they didn't envision, I'd say half to 3/4 of the room, there was 6 of them, was very familiar with the layout, knew the roads. Some of them had been up there with us on a site visit. Some of them didn't know it as well, and the ones that didn't know it didn't want to commit to certain things because they just hadn't seen it. But, if we're sitting here in June and nothing has happened, that's a problem. And we'll probably know by April, at which point, they'll have a very unhappy town manager to deal with. I was as polite as I could be today. I don't have it in me to be polite again if we have the same discussion.
So just so I understand this, I cut you off, sir.
Bob, the improvements for crosswalk, is the thought there it's signalized and with
They wouldn't need
pedestrian
to
signs?
change any of the signalization per se, but they would need to specifically put in a crosswalk that's visible,
Right.
crosswalk that's
So you
visible.
put in a pedestrian light, walk, don't walk kind of thing?
They would have that, yeah, that would be part of it, so I guess technically, yeah, there's a little change there.
It is
But they don't
signalized.
know whether they wanna go directing the pedestrians towards the gas station and then across Main Street, or across Main Street and then into Dandelion. That was the main question they had. I explained where the school was, I explained where most of the kids walk, but that's for them to decide.
Right. It would make sense, my opinion, right, home goods side,
Yeah.
right, to the gas station, and then over Franklin. Because you're not allowed to do kitty corner crosswalks anymore.
And we don't do all four corners, since you're shutting down all traffic?
I don't think they felt it was necessary, that you just needed the two legs, whichever way was best. And as a somewhat of a spin-off to this, that I don't think the state needs to get involved with, but I do, is a discussion with Home Goods about exiting Home
Yeah.
Goods onto Main and not going left. So a number of the reported accidents are because people are exiting Home Goods, making a left,
I don't see
and they don't see well. Now, if this temporary short-term solution is put into place, that'll actually be a big help, because presumably, when there's a lot of traffic, someone is gonna be
Can't get out.
stopped going north, waiting to make a left, and that will thus free up that lane for you to pull out into and go north, if you can. Quite often, the problem is they're pulling out, trying to go north, and there's all sorts of two-lane traffic coming.
Right.
So if there's only one lane traffic coming, it helps that problem. But we can still have the discussion with Home Goods. They would have the right to put up a sign and say, no left turn only. We can't. We have to ask them. It's
And then they
private
just go
property.
out the
And
Franklin
then they just
Street.
go out Franklin Street. So honestly, if it were me and there was traffic, I'd go out Franklin. It's just easier to then head north.
Right.
But not everyone does that.
Yeah.
Just so I'm totally clear on this, so the left turn lane on Main Street, both northbound and southbound, as it approaches Franklin, will be left turn only, correct?
There will
Labeled,
be a left turn signal for it.
but it's
will
not
not
gonna
be
be.
left turn
yeah,
only.
Okay,
But it'll be signaled so that you can take a left turn. At the same time, both lefts will be allowed,
Okay.
and there'll be no north-south traffic
In the
allowed.
way that Forest Street is already today.
But if you want to sit in that lane and mean to go north, and people want to go left, and there's a light,
okay, yep,
that's an issue.
okay.
They seem to think that that was a good solution, and that it may well fix a lot of the problem. I think it will too.
Oh, it works at Forest Street, works up in North Reading. up
And we
at the-
talked a lot about all the other intersections, and the fact that this will be a good test case for maybe a solution that's needed in other places.
Granted, I realize that the others aren't on that hill, but.
Yeah.
Mr. Magnus?
Euphoric would be, an understatement at this point in time. I just want to thank Bob personally for all his efforts, along with, I assume George was in there.
Yeah, George was there today.
To try and move this project forward. The board and what the town has done on this has been absolutely terrific since we brought this up, I don't know, last July or whatever. This project has moved at probably light speed in comparison to a lot of state projects.
True.
The fully protected left, I agree with Bob, we all think that that's gonna be a huge, huge help and minimal cost.
Yeah.
The crosswalk issue, again, is a real important thing, and, how they decide to solve that, that's up to them, that's not us. We brought the issue up, and we'll rest with whatever the experts who do this all the time decide. But this is just phenomenal news, and I really want to thank Bob for his leadership on this, which has been really out front of that. And I think you guys recognize the same thing.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Bob. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Come May 1st, right, if you don't see it then, you're gonna see a very red.
I think we have our top man is on top of it down there, right, Bob?
We have our top people on it.
Right,
Yes, we do.
right. I don't think they want to see him down there, but.
I don't think they really want to see me again.
And the minority leader.
Right,
Yes, and we reminded them of that.
perfect. Thank you, and a lot of people are going to be very, very happy to hear this news.
So with that, we have a discussion on our ambulance fees. This is something we've discussed, and we looked at this through our budget planning, right?
Yeah, I'll just spend a couple minutes. It's in your packet, but I haven't had a chance to share with the board. at the last two pair of budget meetings you had with all the various town departments, you all indicated some interest in certain areas, and I'll just show you the results. So the consensus was, ambulance fees going up by the chief had recommended a set of figures, the ambulance billing company had recommended a set of figures, and then the board asked, specifically Marcy began the discussion of how high would they need to go in order to fund the assistant fire chief position, for instance. So the set of figures that I put together in front of you actually did not require them to go as high as Marcy asked, which is the average. They're still, and I'll show you in another table, between 15% or so below that average of Essex County. And that should do the job of funding close to what that position costs. So the selectmen asked for, increasing the ambulance fees, for not increasing the budget for snow and ice. And just to be fair, we share that with the schools, so we get 1/3 of that. And then these are the other priorities. To replace the technology equipment, to add 16-hour-a-week social worker position on a part-time basis. I'll come back to that, the fire executive officer number 2 position. And then I really only had one category here for overtime, but it seems reasonable to me that, in light of the fire position being added, the theory of that in labor negotiations will be it's downward pressure on overtime. It's, another person to count for minimum manning, we hope. So I would propose to fund the $15,000 in the police overtime and nothing in the fire overtime budget at this point. So that can all be accomplished within the available resources and the projection of ambulance fees, which is now on this page. The motion in front of you are these figures here. My estimate for that is $90,000 to $100,000 of revenue. I'm only using 85 just to be a little bit safer. The fire chief had recommended slightly lower figures that would yield somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000. The ambulance billing company was kind of between the two of us when they were asked. You can see that after these fees are raised, if you agree with all of them, the only fee that'll be above average is a mileage fee, and I don't object to that at all. In fact, the chief and I had a discussion that that's the one fee we'd like to see go up, because that's causing us a direct cost in capital as wear and tear on equipment, so I don't mind being a few percent above average. But you can see in terms of the rest of the fees, we're, again, 10 to 20% below. So that's the motion I prepared for you, which does, take into account the funding needs.
Yeah, so Bob, thank you for putting this together, and I for those who read it and researched it, certainly makes sense to us, but for those who are watching and it may be the first time that they're seeing this, right, so this is because we run our own ambulance service through the fire, and what you're seeing is comparables to other companies, right?
Yeah, in Essex County.
In Essex County, and we were well below the average, right?
Yes,
So-
we were. Which is interesting because the last time the board had this formal discussion was, I think it was either 6 or 7 years ago, at which point we were kind of in the middle, and we ended up raising ourselves to the middle. But the perception after that was we were on the high side, and I don't really know where that perception came from, but I know FinCom had it. And at the time, the board had authorized the fire chief, maybe it was the town manager, to change this with CPI so you don't have to come back to us every year. And that's what the fire chief did. But it's very clear that other towns used medical inflation, let's say, and not consumer price inflation, because we fell way behind. So we'll just try to keep our eye on this every 3 to 5 years. And again, I think the board's expressed interest is, it's a fee that we don't have to be high on. We don't want to be in the top 10%, but let's just be somewhat reasonable and somewhere in the middle, maybe a little below the average.
John?
If I read this, the sum of those incomes is 157, the 47, 85, and 25. You're funding 140, so you've got 17K of additional funding, and that's what lets you fund the executive officer at 85?
The assumption behind this change here that
Yep.
we're asking for, which the ambulance company estimates is 90 or 100,000,
Right.
I'm assuming it gets you 85,000 towards that cost. So
Correct. Okay, we're saying the same thing.
It mostly funds the position. It doesn't fully, but same thing.
Dan, did I see your hand?
Yeah, if you could flip back to your previous chart. Was your recommendation, I know it's some sort of an amalgamation of the Essex County average and the recommendation of the ambulance billing company and the fire chief? In some cases, you went more with the average of the billing company and the chief. In other cases, you tilted more toward Essex. For instance, on ALS 2,
Mhm.
that's much higher than either recommendation. Did you have a philosophy of how you picked and chose?
My philosophy was to keep it as close to the 10 to 15% band for everything,
Oh, I
to
see.
just be
Yeah.
consistent, and then to use somewhat of a rounded dollar figure, which is why it's not all, 12.5% or whatever.
Okay.
Did I see your hand? Thank you. We have a motion for accepting these fees.
Move that the Board of Selectmen approve the following ambulance billing rates to become effective on March 1st, 2014, and that these rates change annually on a schedule to be determined by the Reading Fire Chief based on future general levels of area CPI. BLS Transport, $850, ALS
Motion
1.
to dispense.
Second.
All in favor? 4-0 to dispense and in favor of the motion? 4-0.
Okay, thank you.
Marcy, second that. I don't know if you heard that.
I feel like my standard role as seconder.
There we go.
We move right along here.
The next item is both the special town meeting warrant and the annual.
I actually did have a question, so.
Oh, sorry.
Backing up to the previous slide where you had the votes that we had taken, I don't know if that was discussed in a meeting that I wasn't here, which is possible.
No.
This is the first everyone has seen it
So,
other than
so
the
did
packet.
we plan to discuss this, or was it?
Oh, by all means.
So, the only thing I wanted to ask is that I noticed that the thing that didn't pass was library overtime and materials. Now, the materials piece, there is some actual impact if the materials is not funded at the full whatever percent, 15% or whatever it is.
Well, my understanding of the
Right.
budget is, as it's currently put together, it hits the 15%.
It hits the 15%,
But
okay.
if we added overtime, then we also had to add some
Okay,
material.
I'm fine with it then, thank you.
And just to point that out, that the line painting and the overtime to the library are sort of the next items.
Mhm.
That if we did get funding from, for instance, lower health insurance, which we still don't know,
Right.
those would be things, if it happens, I probably need to give a budget to the finance committee Monday or Tuesday next week. So if I hear health insurance and we can
Mhm.
sneak those two things in, we will.
All right, thanks.
But it's my understanding, the financial, what you forego financially from the state
Mm-hmm.
for not fully funding the materials is, in my opinion, not worth the,
Okay.
And a waiver is
especially in a
available.
year that,
I can't,
because
no, I
I'm
don't,
going,
I
I think it's absolutely crazy that the state is making us fully fund materials when 2/3 of it will be in
would be in storage. I agree, I agree.
It's, you know, if they said, invest into electronic, something that made sense, right? But I mean, seriously, right? No, I know you don't,
No,
but,
yeah.
then you feel like, well, you're beating up the library. I'm like, no, I'm beating up the state because they're not very wise. They don't read enough, I think.
They should maybe go to their own library.
Right. Mr. Magnus.
Mr. Chairman, the question I had on that, and I saw the discussion on tape, was, has anybody gone specifically to the state library, whatever they get called, and request a specific waiver for a one-year time period on that requirement? I do believe the state has granted waivers, whether it's for this particular issue or not. But it would seem that, given the circumstances, that might be a place to ask, during this time period, is there an opportunity to request a waiver?
Right.
And I don't know whether anybody's done that or not.
I
There's some trustees
believe
here.
they have, but I'll bow
And
to
Ruth
Bob.
was going to
I'll answer
provide
part of
some
that question, by all means chime in. There's two requirements. One is that your budget goes up 2.5% a year, and the other is that you do 15% funding of materials. Now, in the last 5 years, the town has not always done both of those things, and 1 year specifically, for the 2.5%, we were doing zeros in most departments. We did a 0 or close to it in the library. we had to request a waiver from the state, and I think something like 250 other communities also requested a waiver. And as far as I understand it, all but one or two were granted. And the ones that weren't granted are things where, if you will, the library was clearly being picked on, that every other department did X and the library was doing substantially worse, so they did not get a waiver. But, you know, where we were treating the library like virtually every other department, they were fine with that. Now, there's been years where we've also been short of the 15%, and we have not sought a waiver because the Friends or the Foundation have made up that difference. And the year I remember, I don't remember which year, I think we were at 13.8 or 13.5% materials, which left a couple percent or so. And maybe that was somewhere in the $10,000 or $5,000 area. And again, the Friends or the Foundation made that up. For this specific circumstance, you know, the library director and the staff are trying to be as sensible as possible in buying electronic, not World Book encyclopedias. So, you know, they're trying to understand that the sensible thing to do with the 15% money is not to buy books, you know, is to buy electronic. But the, you know, one of the conditions of this grant is that you offer a full library service. You will not get a waiver for any reason because of construction to any of their rules. So you can apply under those other circumstances because, you know, the library budget can't go up as much as the 2.5% because you're not doing that, and we're not suggesting that. We can fund it less than 15% if that's the will of the Finance Committee and ultimately town meeting, but we will not get a waiver from that requirement, and they will have to find the resources to make up that difference.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. If you don't mind, although there's people here, I think we can zip through the preview of the annual town meeting warrant really quick. You're going to have to close it at the next meeting.
Right.
The first couple articles are conventional. The first one's the election. The next three are by charter. Nothing particularly interesting there. We do have a very interesting citizens petition to amend the current FY14 budget. I'll show you that next week. It's
Unusual.
It's not a lot of dollars. It's for some recognition at one of the cemeteries of some of our veterans. I would happily put it in the next article, which is our suggestions, but they went out and did a petition, so we're certainly fine with that. At this time, I don't know of too many budget amendments because there are a couple on Thursday night, but I'm sure there'll be a few. We'll move money around. Certainly snow and ice will be one of them. We have some money in the general fund that we would like to move into the Smart Growth Stabilization Fund. There's $150,000 that came in June. I understand there's another 150 or possibly 300,000 that should come in before town meeting, so we'll just move that. In the budget this year in FY15, we're not proposing to take any money out, so whatever's there will just grow. There's two easements. There's one sewer easement that'll be described next week, and the applicant will be in front of you. And then there's a water easement that we've discovered in the last few weeks. We already asked town meeting for a sewer and a drainage easement on Belmont in order to do some water pipe work. We really should ask for a water easement, and that was an oversight in the past. The typical approving capital plans and approving the budget will need to happen. Presuming that we don't use up all the money that was set aside in FY14 for OPEB, we'll have some left over to fund the trust, which is the same thing we've done over the last 2 years. There's the Affordable Housing Trust fund allocation plan that the board needs to do now every year. And then there's revolving funds that need to happen every year.
By the way, we'll volunteer to do some of the motions so John doesn't lose his
Yeah,
voice.
I listed him for everything, I think. Chapter 90 you have to accept, and there's a little bit of a dilemma this year in which town meeting last April accepted $900,000, which both the governor and the legislature had agreed to. Only $600,000 has been released, and it's probably not going to have more released because even though the funds are technically there, the revenues are running at 5%. The governor did not get the tax increases he wanted that would have funded the Chapter 90, so he's not willing to release other revenues that have come in. And it's clearly a bone of contention between the two.
It's funny
parts
that
of
every
government.
one of the gubernatorial candidates that spoke at the MMA was in favor of releasing that money.
So
I don't know what
we're
he's
in a
standing on that.
we're in a real dilemma, as is every other town, especially not so much cities because they can just meet. we have two conflicting legal opinions on whether we need to go to town meeting on FY14's vote and change it to the 600, because we're not supposed to allow for more than has happened. But if that happens and they release it at the end of June, we can't accept
We
it.
can't accept it.
So my guess is we're gonna just leave it alone,
I would.
let the paperwork and the accounting people fuss with the fact that we did something that's not technically right. If we have a possibility of getting 300,000, I think we need to leave that door open.
Can always fix it after the fact.
Yeah, and again, many people are in our position. We'll have some debt that needs to be authorized, it's not very much, and then we'll remove town meeting members. So, you know, depending, if all these articles survive, and I think they all will, we're in pretty good shape now, we may well have a one-night town meeting.
Say that's it.
It seems to me that given this, it's a very heavily financial town meeting, and again, to remind you, that's because the bylaw committee already went recently and redid the bylaws. The zoning advisory committee is doing significant work with a goal of next November, and the charter review committee is also doing a substantial amount of work with a goal of next November. They originally wanted to hit April town meeting, but they can't. So the reason that we're sort of not seeing those kinds of articles is because next November will be very busy. But I've told the superintendent, we have to prepare to do the budget on the first night because we potentially could steam through in one night. And we did that a couple of years ago, so it has happened. So that's all I have. We'll have a little bit more information on some of these sort of non-traditional items next week when you close the warrant.
Question. Bob, I know there's going to be an instructional motion presented Thursday night to form a permanent building committee.
I've heard that.
Is that possibly anything that could be fast-tracked onto this warrant? I know we've only got 2 weeks before we have to close it, correct?
I don't know, that's a good question.
Huh.
As I understand the instructional motion, it's going to be for November town meeting, I think specifically.
I think that's
but-
for a permanent, maybe charter change, but there might be some interim possibility of fixing it through bylaw change.
Oh, okay, I don't know.
I could talk to Barry, I know Barry Berman's planning to respond to that, I could talk to him about that.
I would say if he's gonna propose an instructional motion Thursday and it's passed, we can't realistically do anything legally in 10 days
Yeah.
in order to accomplish closing a warrant article that has any bite to it. I don't think so.
Okay.
I think reporting to April town meeting would certainly be reasonable. That's a few months away, and any progress. My guess is whatever his instructional motion is going to suggest is going to require a group of people, school committee, library trustees, town side folks, to sit down and talk about what do they want to do.
Right.
I've seen a draft of what he wanted. I don't know where he ended up. When the selectmen form some kind of an ad hoc committee, you have to formally vote on the language. This is presumably something that's higher level, if you will, and goes to town meeting. That's going to require legal language that a whole group of people are comfortable with, and that shouldn't happen in 10 days. But November is reasonable.
Yeah, given the other circumstances, I agree.
Yeah. Okay?
Just for those who are watching, we are not meeting next week. Our next meeting will be February 25th.
So the next discussion is the actual, you have a copy of your warrant. Typically, the selectmen vote on articles, not every article, but many of the articles, especially ones you sponsor. And so, you know, we didn't have a chance to do that before by the way the financial forum closing of the warrant happened after your last meeting, and this is the next meeting you had. So presumably the board wants to go through and start with Article 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and take a position on any of that.
Okay, so,
Shall I make a motion that we can discuss under each?
yes, please, thank you. That's
Move the Board of Selectmen support Article 3 of the special town meeting warrant.
Second.
discussion. Any hearings?
It's pretty routine, yeah.
All in favor? 4-0.
Okay. Move the Board of Selectmen support Article 4 of the special town meeting warrant.
Discussion?
Yeah, this is disposing of surplus materials. That's
Pretty
pretty routine.
Routine, yep. 4-0.
Move the Board of Selectmen support Article 5 of the special town meeting warrant.
Second.
It's regarding changes to the...
Changes to finance structure, or the,
I did actually have a
If you have any
question for
questions,
Bob.
sure, yeah.
So if we're replacing a boiler system at Joshua Eden School, there's no capital changes that need to happen for that? Where, in other words, we weren't planning to replace that boiler in some
No.
future year?
No, it was completely unexpected and unplanned for, if you will.
Oh,
And
do we have that, have we now thought about adding that into the plans for the other schools? Because boilers do eventually need to be replaced, right?
I'll talk to
So
the facilities folks about
we
that.
should just make sure we have that
Yeah,
incorporated
they've
in
got a
some
pretty
place.
robust capital plan, but
Yeah.
this, again, they just did performance contracting.
That's what I was
That
gonna
did
ask.
not replace these, just to be
Oh, okay.
clear.
Okay.
So some of the older
Some of the
ones
other
they
ones
did,
have been,
and the
but
ones
this
that
one-
used to be on the capital plan were replaced and taken away. This was really unexpected.
Let's just make sure there's not one more or two more looking at.
Yeah, well, if there is, it'll be unexpected.
When does the performance contracting get reviewed again?
I don't know. I mean, they review it annually by contract to see what the savings are, and we've hit all the benchmarks and greatly exceeded them. I'm not sure we're needing to do any of that anymore. It's just, our energy costs are very low. We have debt that we're incurred to, pay for all that over a period of time. I think we borrowed for 12 years. By all financial measures, it's worked really well. We've saved more money than we thought, forgetting where prices of energy is, just volume of energy, we've done better than we thought.
Just for the unenlightened, coming back, Selectmen, what is performance contracting?
Thank you.
We, a couple of years ago, we had an opportunity to really look at all of our town buildings, except the library. We did a little bit at the library, but we knew it needed a lot of work. And looked at all the HVAC systems, all the windows, all the ceiling of the building, if you will, and looked at all ways that we could spend money and save money and save use of energy. So we put out an RFP under a different procurement law where we did not have to take the low bidder, which was excellent. We interviewed 6 firms that were all very good. We had 2 top choices. Either of them would have been very good. We chose one. It was by no means the low bidder. And I have to say, of all the projects I've been involved in 10 years, it's worked out the best. And I have to say, the reason is because you didn't have to take the low bidder. You picked the most qualified person who was going to do the job as
Isn't that
needed.
amazing how that works?
And so we looked at extensive menus, pages and pages of things we could replace. And we looked at the break even of every single item in there. Most towns would have chosen to do, I guess I'll call a lease in which the school committee, for instance, could have authorized up to a 10-year lease, and you would have spent as much money as you would have saved. So over the 10 years, your projected energy savings were $3 million. It would have cost you $3 million to do it, and it would have been a wash. So if you will, no money would have changed hands. You would have paid the vendor out of savings for 10 years. That's how you'd structure the lease.
Very good.
The cost of the lease, however, was much more expensive than the town can borrow money. So we discussed, and town meeting eventually authorized us to borrow the money, and that allowed us to do even more work and to stretch the time frame out to 12 years. So we did about another $2 million worth of work, which really cost us about $1 million. And we're one of the only communities that have gone to town meeting to ask for authorization formally. But it was a much better project. We did more work than we would have been able to afford. We picked some long payback items because it seemed like the right thing to do. So there were some items that were longer than 12-year payback. That was sort of the average of the whole exercise was 12 years.
This is a nice way to get around some of the cumbersome state bidding laws. You
And
have
it
to
was-
take the lowest.
And it was specifically
Yeah, low
for
sub bids.
performance contracting. It was a new Mass General law that allowed this.
And the other thing is where they had to make some guarantees around the savings,
Yes.
then the quality of the work had to be there, because otherwise they weren't,
Then
they were
have
gonna
to
be
pay us.
paying money back
That's
to
an
us.
excellent
So it
point.
was a really nice, structured way for it to work.
Yeah. And,
Common
just to be
sense.
fair to the library, we did some of the work, but we didn't do any of the work in terms of replacing all the windows, sealing
we
the
knew
building,
that
because we
things had
didn't
to
know,
happen.
where that project would go. But,
Thank you.
by all measures, from an energy standpoint, it's been really successful.
Excellent. I don't think we voted on 5.
That's for 4
Yep.
or 5?
5.
Article 6.
Do you want to have a discussion and then a motion, or how do you want to do
Well,
this?
we do the motion first, and then
Discussion.
I want to add a little to the motion. Move that the Board of Selectmen support Article 6 of the special town meeting warrant to be funded solely through debt exclusion. In other words, to exclude the use of free cash and to exclude.
I'm not comfortable
So,
seconding that.
yeah, so maybe we should have a discussion, because the motion before us normally is whether we support an article or not. We've already approved of the article because it's in the warrant.
You put it on the warrant at the request of the Board of Library Trustees.
Correct, right, our committee has agreed to sponsor the article.
No, we closed the warrant with the Board of Trustees sponsored article. That's the we have taken no position on it, except to vote down to the warrant.
Right.
Right.
And so, but the standing motion is normally, like the previous ones, do you support it or not?
Well, there's more complexity involved here because there are a number of funding mechanisms which have not yet been discussed by the
Right.
FinCom and which will be discussed at 6:30 PM Thursday.
Right.
Now, you're saying the board may or may not want to weigh in on this?
Well, no, well, I was just trying to clarify.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm saying that I'm not comfortable with us making additional adjustments to this particular motion at this point in time.
Is it within our latitude to do so?
I think so.
It's a,
Historically, the board has not voted on articles that someone else sponsors, just to put that out there. You can do anything you want, but historically, when another group, such as the trustees or the school committee, has put an article on, you've not voted.
True.
And but the motion to put this warrant together the other night, we had that discussion at
At the financial forum.
Financial
Yeah.
Forum at the Senior Center with the language. Granted,
Yes.
at that time, we didn't have other, so I just, you know,
Well, we crafted that language to allow for
broad.
multiple
The discussion.
eventualities. Now, there are several ideas floating around how to do this, and we will make the motion, actually, on Thursday. It's not, I think, quite been nailed down yet. I want to refer you to the town manager's memorandum that was sent out, where he was fairly, let me read the recommendations.
What page is this on?
This is on page 4 of the supplemental material Bob sent out.
Oh,
I don't
okay.
think it was in our packet.
Yeah.
I can read the recommendations. It was a very good analysis, Bob, and I thank you for that. You probably worked some hours on the weekend over this. Town manager recommendation for financial options, which is, I think, why we have a kind of a dog in the fight, of at least this part of the issue. The library building is in serious need of attention. Do not use any free cash to support any project costs at this time. Use only excluded debt for project costs in order to protect the operating budgets. I would advocate asking for $4 million in additional funds as a hedge against unforeseen project circumstances and associate a strong statement that we would deal with any such circumstances inside the tax levy in the future. Have the library community begin a strong fundraising effort to offset any future project cost increases, or to allow less debt to be excluded onto the tax rate. Remember, we will not borrow the last funds until we know they are needed. In light of all the other competing needs for funds, consider extending from 10 to 15-year debt. This leaves the approximate $135 share for the average single-family home in place, but for 5 years longer. Municipal finance philosophy is to finance for a period clearly less than the useful life. Presumably, we're looking at a 25-plus year fix for the library facility, and yet spread that cost over future beneficiaries of the project. And finally, if a debt exclusion is not approved by town meeting and/or the voters, use free cash to repay all the incurred project costs, return the state grant funds, and start the process all over, considering other community building needs. We could phrase it more in the terms of, we would prefer to see a motion made. Is that acceptable to you, Marcy, that would steer this toward a debt exclusion rather than free cash in view of these recommendations? Is that okay? In other words, this does not speak to the merits of the article,
Right.
but rather to the financial
To
underpinnings.
what the Board of Selectmen's opinion is on
What do you
the
think?
approach. Yeah.
with the absence of the opportunity to talk about this is the first opportunity the board's had, other than the financial forum. my thinking at the financial forum was to leave the discussion field as wide as it could be, anticipating that it would have to be neck down and we don't want to sleep on the discussion before we returned. I read this over the weekend and I thought these were very on point, both how to potentially view this and how to fund it. And I think it's important that the Board of Selectmen do take a position with regard at least to whether it's inside or outside the tax levy. My question, though, is if the article is sponsored by the library trustees, there's no vehicle to modify the language in the warrant that's already in play. All we're doing is
No,
adding.
you can make,
You know, historically, let's say at town meeting, this gets a little tricky. The language in warrant articles are usually drafted as wide as possible. However, the language of a motion is not, or doesn't have to be. Normally, the language of a motion at town meeting is identical, or some subset, because you don't need all the verbiage of what is in a warrant article. But there's times in the past where, you know, the FinCom, which are really the financial advisors, if it's a financial situation, has crafted different language. You know, this is kind of an interesting situation that's never exactly come up in the 18 years I've been involved with town meeting in the town. Remember that it's the Board of Library Trustees article. You're a different elected official, so entitled to whatever opinion you wish. But in terms of the actual finance piece of this, the Finance Committee is the authority that recommends to town meeting whatever they wish. Now, town meeting can listen to them and listen to them and listen to you and do whatever it wants. If you're strictly speaking about the financial piece of this, I believe it's the Finance Committee's right to make that motion at town meeting. Anyone can make any motion, and then anyone else can stand up and offer an amendment, so it sort of is a formality. But where this is, if the motion is to support the project, that's the right of the library trustees, it's their article, and that will be a motion that is made. But the Finance Committee, I believe, has the right to offer I'll call it an amendment to the main motion, which is to support the article as to how to fund it. And that's their.
or they could offer that as the main motion, depending on what they work out the warrant articles.
It would be inappropriate for the library trustees, I believe, to offer a main motion other than to support Article 6. And it's silent on how to fund it. It's just, you know, we think that this is a good article and we need to support the article and we need additional money. The reason, at least the discussion that was had at the financial forum and leaving it wide open, was for the Finance Committee to lead another financial forum, which had to be canceled, and discuss, which will now happen at town meeting, how to fund it. So the idea all along was the Finance Committee will be the one that makes the recommendation at town meeting. Now again, any of these bodies can make any recommendation they want to town meeting. But historically and properly by the charter, it's the Finance Committee that is the body who makes suggestions to town meeting on financial issues. So I believe that it should be their purview to make the first statement on how to fund it, however they decide. They obviously haven't decided yet. But you folks can vote tonight on something, the library trustees can certainly do the same, and then they can report to town meeting, well, we either agree or don't agree with what the Finance Committee has said, and this is our opinion. And then town meeting has to take all of this into effect and do what they will.
Right, because this article, it says, not like you said, says
Silent.
nothing about the funding, doesn't even ask town meeting, should we go, you know, to the voters with it.
Right, and that could be an amendment.
Well, it does. Let me just find the language
Oh,
before I say
does
the
it?
wrong thing. I think it authorizes debt.
Well, it's our standard language of to raise, borrow, or transfer from available
Okay.
funds in other
Fair
appropriate. Right?
Yeah,
I
fair
think
point.
you had presented modified language, which we took out for the purposes
Right.
of crafting the
And that
broader
was the
language,
excluded part you took
which
out, but-
could be put back in either in the form of a main motion
Yeah,
or.
the way bond counsel looks at this, for what this worth, is this authorizes debt. But you're right, it authorizes debt or other options if you choose to use them.
Right.
It's also silent on the amount of incremental debt.
Well, that's made,
The motion would have to specify the
that'd
amount.
be in the motion.
And that's
so-
the difference between a motion and an
Right.
article.
The
You
funds
usually
will be
don't put the
additional
definite,
to the 14.9 million, right, we don't say,
No, the motion would have to say, for instance, when the
Yeah.
article was written initially a year ago, there was no financial number in that
Correct.
no,
article.
it was just.
It was just, here's the article, and, you know, it always kind of seemed wrong to me, that's how it went to the voters, without a number. But town meeting in the motion was then asked to approve, I think it was 14.9 million as a total project, with the understanding that the town share would be 9.8. However, we needed the 14.9 authorized because the state payment system was slower than we'd spent money, so we would go above 9.8 at some point in time. So typically what we ask for, and this is one of the warrant articles you'll see next week, is the full amount, even if someone else is paying some portion of that. That's just the better way to do it.
Right. Dan?
I see there are two members of the Board of Trustees here. Could you tell me what your plan is for Thursday in terms of presenting this, and who will present it specifically?
That, I can't answer that.
I believe David Hutchinson.
Is he a town meeting member?
No,
No.
but he was presenting the, you know.
You can't present a motion if he's not a town
Oh,
meeting
the
member.
motion, I don't know.
Who's going to present it?
We're gonna talk to Bob. 'cause we're
Oh,
not sure.
are any of the
I have
trustees
a
town meeting
comment.
members?
I think Andrew.
Andrew's about this very question and haven't just had
I
a
Yeah.
think Andrew
chance to
was.
talk to him.
Anyone can make the motion if they're a town meeting member. It
But
doesn't
you-
have to be a trustee.
Right. You can speak to it if you're not, but you can't make it.
I'm not a town meeting member, so I can't.
So,
But you need a town meeting member to actually make the
But-
main motion, which is support Article 6 to the amount of X number of dollars.
Alice, at last night's meeting, you intimated that you would be seeking this through free cash in your motion. Is that correct? Has the board taken a vote to do that?
no,
And when do you plan
No.
to take such a vote?
it hasn't.
Are you posted for
We're
Thursday?
posted.
We're posted for Thursday night.
Oh, here's Andrew.
Oh, here he is.
We were just talking
Speaking of the
about
devil.
Okay.
Are you a town meeting member?
Yeah,
Okay. We were trying to discuss who would make the motion for Article 6, and if you're a town meeting member, you can do it.
okay, happy to do that.
Yeah, so,
They don't know what they're presenting.
Well, they'll decide.
well,
Again, my
I
opinion
guess
is
this
they
meeting at
should not
6:30 is key.
present a financing method in their motion. It's the purview of FinCom to
But
do
they-
that, but they can certainly then debate the merits of whatever FinCom says after the fact.
But the main motion must contain some funding means of some
No, it
sort.
doesn't have to.
No,
No?
every dollar one I've seen has.
Oh, amount of dollars, yes, but it doesn't say
By,
how.
it usually says by levy or.
No, it would use this language.
The language
It would be
that's
general.
there
just
would
it's
be,
before.
And
us,
again,
maybe.
just bear in mind, town meeting authorizes debt. That's their
Yeah.
job. The voters authorize where the debt is. But town meeting can put a question on the ballot by requiring it to be excluded debt. So
Right.
if town meeting says, we want X number of dollars, this is what happened a year ago, is 14.9 million of debt excluded from the tax rate. That's what town meeting voted formally. That then passed it along to the voters, because only the voters can authorize that. If last year town meeting had said 14.9 million of debt, knock yourselves out, good luck paying for it, it wouldn't have gone to the voters.
Correct.
You could have then asked the voters, but effectively town meeting asked the voters the way they worded it.
Can I ask a question? I'm
Yes.
sorry not to be able, as adept at following this, but I'm not a town meeting member, and I just want to make sure I understand that what you're saying is the Board of Trustees has to present the motion, but cannot actually present a financial solution in the motion?
That's my opinion, and we can get a legal opinion. You should,
Work with the FinCom on this.
Article 6 is, you know, we need money for a project.
Right.
And that's what the motion of the trustees should be. And then, and your motion is generic, it's the same language as in Article 6, it doesn't specify a method. It doesn't eliminate any, it doesn't specify any. Then, if the Finance Committee wishes to stand up and earlier that night has taken a vote in some fashion, they can say, we think the best financing method is X. And they can make an amendment to the motion with that if they choose. I don't know if they will, they may. Then, after discussion, you know, any number of people, whether they're town meeting members or not, can make other amendments or have opinions on amendments and say, we don't like this, we like this, we offer this amendment. So that seems to be the procedural way that it should progress. But it doesn't mean to choke off free speech at all. It's just, you're the folks that put the article in. You should say, support this article, we need X dollars. And then if the finance committee wishes, they can narrow the article by saying, you know, the article's drafted to pay for it any number of ways. We only think it should be paid this way or some combination of ways. You know, and no one has to support that amendment, but it's their right to offer it that way.
And obviously, David will be asking Mr. Folds for permission as a non-town meeting member to speak.
I hope he has his voice back. Is he doing
So
okay?
do we.
He's trying so hard last night.
And then, obviously, if there are others who feel that they may or may not want to speak, you may want to let Alan know beforehand, even if you don't speak.
Yeah.
But at least he will be aware and can be looking for either acknowledgement or something.
And as I understand, we also have to ask him about the architects and.
I would,
Oh, sure.
anyone who may
Speak
speak,
as
That's
well.
automatic, yeah, he'll
yeah.
grant that. Yeah.
If you want to, presumably, we're still imagining the setup, there'll be a table for the library and the project folks. Normally, we're in a different setting, so it's a little hard to picture, but normally town meeting members are asked to be behind a certain line, behind it, so it's clearly identifiable to the moderator. You're not a town meeting member, you're behind that space, so I need to get permission for you to speak. Otherwise, people sat everywhere, he wouldn't know.
It's going to be hard.
In this case, we want to specify who has that permission in advance and let all those people presumably sit at a table that would not be segregated. But that way he knows these people have already been approved, like everyone else who's a town meeting member, anyone can speak.
And then, Mr. Grimes, being the only town meeting member for the library, is the one who has to make the motion, because a town meeting member needs to make the motion, and then others can be recognized to discuss that motion.
And that's something your staff would work with to help them craft, if they want it.
Excuse me, absolutely, yeah.
Mr. Van Magnus?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It looks like some people will be in front of the free throw line, some will be at half court,
Exactly.
maybe on the 30-point line, or whatever.
You're throwing the medicine ball around.
There you go. Of confusion, and I guess just in terms of the process on this, I went to try and get to the warrant today online. I couldn't find it on the website. Maybe it could be put up there in time.
Okay.
And this letter, I don't know, is this going to be available?
Is that
or-
up on the selectmen's
It's in the
website?
selectmen's packet, that's what I'm looking at right now is on the website, it's in the selectmen's packet.
Okay,
It's from our packet,
It was
it's not
emailed,
part of the
but it might
Just-
just be
It
on
was
the
just up
website.
there today.
Yeah, because I went to the packet earlier and it wasn't there.
It
So
wasn't in the
it's
packet
updated.
that was sent out to them on Thursday, it was
A new one,
today.
okay.
Is it possible to post that in our?
Yep.
The concern that, just listening to this, because, and not as a town meeting member, but because the financial forum that was going to be last week didn't happen, it seems like all of the decisions of who's gonna do what to whom is gonna happen at 6:30 on Thursday night. And I don't know how the boards are all gonna communicate or try to come up with a plan between 6:30 and whatever time you kick off the town meeting, 7:30 or whatever. And it just seems like this whole process is, I hate to say it, but it just feels out of control. And now I saw, and Bob, I'm not sure I understand where you are, but it sounds like instead of 3.5 million, that number's grown to 4 million.
That's only my suggestion,
I understand.
no one else.
But I understand your reservations about the 3.5, but quite frankly, each time we talk about this subject, you know, I'm afraid to have a discussion on Thursday night because the 4 may become 5. So the process just feels like it's a little bit out of control here on this particular article, and I think part of that could really could become how the outcome comes out on Thursday night too, because people, I think, genuinely are going to be grossly confused as to what the heck is really going on.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, Mr. Van Magnus, and I think notes for the library, and Andrew, I'm going to make a friendly suggestion that you support David in communication. It can be a little, as you know, overwhelming up there, and just a friendly suggestion. Okay. With that, I think you need to explain Because if Mr. Van Magnus, who's very close to what we're doing, is confused, then half the town meeting's going to be confused. And part of it is the timing, right? And I think Bob or the library needs to walk through, well, why do we even have a special town meeting? Go through the calendar of events because they're trying to get it out to contract for July 1, right? And so if you back into July 1 RFP release for construction, this is the timing that led us. And so now you're going, well, so we need a special town meeting. Okay, well, all right. So, but finance doesn't have enough time to meet. So, well, that meeting got canceled. And so you're right. It is looking a lot like we're trying to rush it. But it's, if people understand the calendar, that's why. It's trying to fit into a calendar.
Yeah, but it comes down to the choice of three motions, I think, 2 or 3. And I think that can be resolved in an hour with 2 boards.
But I think people need, because, well, why are we doing this now? And how come we're not hearing about FinCom's decision until, how come they didn't have a vote? How come they didn't have this discussion and vote, right? Well, because we slaved for a meeting, snowstorm canceled it, and they couldn't meet this week, and I bet they don't even meet tomorrow. I'm going to tell you, they won't have a quorum tomorrow.
Thursday.
They're not posted?
Thursday.
No, the snowstorm on Thursday.
Oh, yeah, I thought, yeah.
We are not posted, correct? This
You
week?
are.
We are, 6:30?
6:30? Yeah,
We are.
for
Yeah.
Thursday
Okay.
night at the, yeah.
Field house.
Bob?
The reason I wrote this memo, whenever I wrote it sometime, I think it was on the weekend, is this is the discussion that would have happened at the financial forum that we didn't have. At least this is my version of it, a portion of it. So I thought I'd better throw it out there for a whole bunch of boards to start thinking about it, because it would be very difficult. It's gonna be challenging as it was, and I agree with James and you that we need to describe to town meeting why we're in a hurry, and we are. That doesn't mean that's the only option, but if you wanna hit an April 1st local election, there was no wiggle room. And the board talked about this, and we talked a little about the financial forum. We need to let town meeting know that. But let me just go through what I outlined as one possible way of discussing Article 6, based on what I heard at the financial forum. And just, please chime in with opinions as you think of them. The town accountant needs to first stand up and talk about revenues and talk about reserves. That's something we do at the financial forum, but it's not something the town meeting always sees. So I'm trying to structure this so town meeting gets the same information a lot of us have that go to financial forums. Next would be Dr. Doherty and I stand up and talk about our operating budgets. He's going to talk about the fact that the school committee has voted a budget that's $500,000 over what we can afford, and there was another 500 or $1 million behind that they would have liked to have had. And I'm going to talk about the fact that to balance our budget, we had to cut $600,000 or $700,000 out of what we would have liked to have had, just so town meeting understands what the operating budget environment is. Then, from what has been very clear from other meetings, we need to take that step back and talk about all the big projects that are in town. Even though they might not be directly related to this, let's just get it all on the table, which we've done at many town meetings. And it includes things like water repairs and sewer repairs and other things. So I've got a whole list of those. Then there's the piece that Dan just read, my opinions, for what they're worth. There might be many other people that need to have opinions, but I was the one writing this memo, so I put in mine. So there needs to be some kind of overview, financial overview. Here's our reserves, here's our revenues, here's what our budgets look like. So whatever you guys are going to decide, you have to understand all that. And then there's some discussion that FinCom should lead about, here's the ways we can finance this project. We can do this, we can do that, we can do some combination of many things, and there's many options. But just to be very clear, and I won't speak for FinCom, but I know the way they think, if there's interest in using $3.5 million of free cash for this project, the immediate consequence in the March budget discussions will be, we will not have $1.5 million to use on our operating budgets. We would be lucky to have half that. So if we use all that free cash to take care of this issue, we will be asking the schools to cut another $500,000 out of their budget and $250,000 out of the town budget, is my guess. And if it doesn't happen like that, it's going to happen the next year, because the reason the Finance Committee had voted in October to allow $1.5 million of free cash is because of the amount of free cash we had. If we only had half as much, there's no way they would have allowed that. or encourage that. The amount is to be debated and set by them, but I know it's not what it is. So it's important for folks to understand if one of the options, which is clearly to do this inside the tax levy, whether by using free cash, by borrowing money, or some combination, it is going to affect the operating budgets for FY15, absolutely. There's no question. That's why my opinion is, I think my job is to protect the operating budgets of the town and the schools, and that's why I think this needs to be debt exclusion. And that's the only reason, nothing sneaky, nothing fancy about it.
Excuse me, and the FinCom understands that they are going to make that type of a presentation, or are they gonna?
I don't know
at
what
least
they
have that kind
understand.
of a robust-
They haven't met, so I don't know. I mean, they know they're meeting at 6:30. They asked to meet at 7, then a couple of them asked to meet at 6:30 because it's a bigger discussion. They understand the time frame. They understand this is not optimal. This should have been a meeting all by itself. But honestly, even if it were, there would be nothing the town meeting could have gotten writing in time. So other than a more cohesive discussion maybe that night, instead of something that happened an hour before.
Bob, could you just clarify what the amount is in that free cash reserve fund, what you're talking
It's
about?
about 7 million, 7 point something. Sharon will go over that Thursday night. So we're talking about using about half. Maybe it's 7.6, I don't remember the exact number.
Bob, it seems to me that this is a perfectly rational agenda. And you set up the context, you set up the ground rules, you set up the boundary conditions, you look at some options, and you draw from that a set of observations. It strikes me that having to get that across 192 town meeting members, who all start from a different place in understanding, is going to be extraordinarily challenging. The dialogue you just had, for us in kind of shorthand, seems to me to be the most important aspect of the night. You start the evening off saying, I told you all this so I could tell you this tagline, and the elements you just described are really the headline for the whole discussion in my mind.
Yeah, it's a complex situation, for sure. But with an explanation, I mean, I'm a pretty simple guy. I need to understand things simply. I understand all this. I can explain it as a simple person, without a lot of trouble. If I stray, tell me I'm being too complex. I don't think it's potentially a very complicated situation, but I don't think the discussion has to be impossible to understand, I guess is the fairest way I can put it. But we all have to agree with and understand some course of attack and not just be going out of order on all sorts of different points. And that's the point of the 6:30 meeting, which would have happened last week, is let's discuss what the plan of attack of discussing this article is. You don't have to do any of this stuff. You could just have the Board of Trustees stand up and say, this is the project, this is why we need money, and then sit down, and then the town meeting can vote. We don't need all this, but it seems to me that in the past, town meeting has asked for more background before they make a decision. And if they're going to consider different options, they just need the information before they make a vote.
Yeah.
Won't this take an awful lot of time, though? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
I understand what you're saying, and it seems to me that there's only so much time to do this when you've only got one night for the special town meeting, so.
The,
all of
One thing the
these-
moderator could do is agree on to fix a time certain for the end of debate. That's a motion.
Well, yeah, the debate is hard to know how long debate will go on. I don't think this part takes a lot of time. The town accountant takes less than 5 minutes. John and I each need 2 to 3 minutes. I think I might go a little slower, and maybe I'll need to speed up a little on going over all the projects there are, because most of them are familiar to town meeting. They don't need a lot of detail. So maybe that's 5 to 10 minutes. I'm not planning on doing PowerPoints and all these fancy slides. We'll just have one slide up there listing all the projects. So I'm not going to go into any kind of detail about anything. Just show you a map of all the projects. And, here's where it gets more, I think, subjective, is what do we want to do here? Because it was, again, my memo, I laid out my opinions. I don't think it's appropriate for me to stand up at town meeting and only give my opinions. But I think it's important that town meeting understand what the options are. So again, in this part of it, I intended to present options, not my opinions. You could spend $3.5 million of free cash. You could borrow $3.5 million inside the tax levy. You could ask the voters to approve $3.5 million debt exclusion. and here's the consequences of those three choices. And then you could make any combination of that you want. But there's no other choice other than those are the three possible directions. And once I've laid out what those choices are and what the consequences are, they've already heard what the financial picture is, then someone else, more appropriately FinCom, can say whatever they want about what their opinion is. And that's the reason why a couple people asked me to send this to town meeting members. I didn't think it was appropriate. It's my opinion. It's not FinCom. You know, some of the information might have been helpful, but certainly not my opinion.
Ma'am?
Is there a possibility of funding using, say, $1 million from free cash, so you're not drawing
Sure.
down and the rest in bonding? Can you do those kinds of,
Well, when you say bonding, I guess
Or
the key is, do you mean inside or outside the tax levy?
inside the tax limits?
Well, it'd all be bonded
It-
even.
Yeah, I mean, let me see if I have one chart that'll help here. If we borrow money inside the levy, or it doesn't matter, if we borrow money, it's gonna cost, you know, between $310,000 and $420,000 a year, depending on if we borrow for 10 or 15 years. So that's if we borrow $3.5 million. If we borrow less, we can do the math and figure out it's a little less. And if we take, let's just say, $1 million of free cash, you know, we knock that down by $50,000 a year, or whatever it is. We say, all right, now we're borrowing $250,000, not $310,000 a year, and there's $1 million less of free cash. So FinCom would have to decide, since there's $1 million less of free cash, are we still gonna go forward with $1.5 million to balance the FY15 budget? And they would decide. I don't know what they would decide. Potentially for a year, they'd say, okay, but that's the best you can hope for. We then have to discuss, at least at the 6:30 meeting, what do we not do, what we plan to do, because we now have 250, 300, 400,000 we have to pay for.
No. So what was
And
originally
that's
on
the question.
our rolling capital project, right? That we
Our capital
Allocate.
plan, what on the capital plan
Capital
doesn't
plan.
get done?
is now going to forego because of the additional, for the library, if we went that route. Or you do a debt exclusion.
What you were,
Sorry, by the way, I meant to give the rules of engagement up here. Please address myself, and I haven't asked you to introduce yourselves, but I will next. Mr. Grimes?
So Andrew Grimes, precinct 4. But I think Bob did lay out pretty well what I see as sort of the three main options. One is free cash. I don't think that's really necessarily just spent straight out of free cash. But I think the two main options are inside, outside the levy for debt. And it's tempting to sort of say, you know, one is you sort of do it inside the debt, inside the levy, or you don't spend it. But I think that we should include in here, you're going to be spending something, you know, $420,000 if we do the project per year out of the capital budget. How much we're going to spend on the library in the next 5 years, even if we don't do the big project. And it's an unknowable number, but the building is really hurting, and I think it's more of an option if you do. But if you don't get the debt exclusion, and you end up having to do debt inside the levy, it's $420,000 a year versus $200,000 a year that you're going to spend anyway. I don't think it's necessarily 400 versus 0, because that building has got a lot of costs that are coming no matter what.
Right.
I think that needs, we should include that in the discussion.
Well, and this is just my opinion, right? And that's what you're going to have a discussion about on the motion.
Yep.
Because what you're all saying is town meeting approves the motion to, increase funding for the library. The debate is, I may not want to support that motion, I being a town or whomever, right? So, people may say, I'm sorry, we gave you $15 million, you gotta figure it out.
Yep.
And that's where your argument, Andrew, of, hey, this money needs to be spent because the library is crumbling, it is a sound and valid one. But you need to get over that threshold. If and once you're over that threshold, then the discussion comes up into
Yeah.
play of, well, how do we finance it now?
Right, and so you're right, the other discussion is, can you do a library project for the amount that's already approved?
All right.
And that's where we have to turn to the experts, because I can't tell you exactly what do you get for 15 million versus
Right.
as they've designed it.
Actually, Andrew, or any of the library trustees, is the library prepared with the same level of precision that they've done the plan to describe the alternatives on Thursday night? Because this is a matter of alternatives, right?
Well, and
Just-
there, with the same level of detail as the one we spent,
No, the same level we've gotten here through a torturous route, right? We've gotten here with a set of
Yeah.
estimates, a set of estimates,
Yep.
a set of estimates. Thursday night will only be relevant if we've got this well-formulated plan now with the owner's project manager and architect weighing in, relative to the other plans that have at least some amount of similar specification. If one is done with approximation and the other one's perfectly accurate, you don't have a way to have people understand the alternatives.
So to put it another way, during the financial forum, David was asked, or you were all asked, what's your plan B? And it was exactly what you're doing. We don't have one. If we don't get this money, the project doesn't go forward and the library, doesn't.
Can I
But-
say that?
yeah.
Katie Bronson, library trustee. The problem with that is that we have this grant, and like, it's from the Board of Library Commissioners, and there are parameters that we have to meet for getting the grant. And if we have, the town has voted us $15 million, almost 5 million of that, 5.1 million is our grant. If we said to the town meeting said, well, you only have that 15 million, we give you no more, go back to the architects and rearrange. The problem is that we can't reduce the project by something, the Board of Library Commissioners says, I think it's somewhat 5% or something like that you can change the plan. So we can't take out enough, so much that the more we take out, we're gonna jeopardize the grant. If we had to stay within those parameters, I think that we would not get the grant because our plan would change so much. So our goal has been to save this grant, to make sure that we're getting the project that the town needs to ensure the library program the town needs. And that's how the building was designed, to meet a particular library program. So we haven't concentrated on a plan B. The architects have given us some statistics and money for renovating the building. But the problem is if we don't have the addition, you have to go back, do a whole new program and a whole new design, because the design of the old building, the renovation, which is the primary amount of money for the project, it's not in the new building, it's in the renovation. That design was predicated on having the addition. So we can't just lop off the addition.
And so that's the thing, it's sort of unknowable
It's
with the
unknowable.
library board, with the state library.
You have to go back
board.
to,
Yeah, you could do a project for 15 million, yes, you could do something, but with 15 million straight out of the town's pocket, possibly, instead of 10 million out of the town's pocket. So that's the other sort of twist on this, and it makes it hard.
To play devil's advocate on that, though, you're asking town to pay 15 million out of pocket today anyway.
Well,
If you get this increase.
yes,
Right.
but you would get the bigger, better library.
I'm just playing, I'm trying to prep you for Thursday, because this is exactly what's coming at you. And to John's point, to be fair, but firm, presenting this kind of stuff has not been the library's forte. And I'm concerned that when somebody says, what's your plan B? Or what's the alternatives? Well, we don't have one. Doesn't sit well when you're talking about $15 million of John?
I guess just to amplify that again, I understand that the programmatics are at risk if you reduce the scope of the building. That isn't the question. The question is, what could you do with the authorized funding? Because you won't need if the grant goes away, you still have some amount of authorized spending. What can you get done for that? When somebody stands up and says, I'm not sure, or the numbers are approximate, or the contingency number is bigger for the new construction versus the historical renovation with all the exceptions, it doesn't necessarily look like it's got the equivalent amount of attention paid to it, and it's obvious when you stare at the numbers. My only fear is all the attention's going to be drawn on looking at the alternatives. It's going to be an easier discussion if you're prepared with, this is what can be done. Let's be honest, we're all adults. This is not our money, it's coming from taxpayers. This is what can be done. And I think what's been done so far has been to describe a primary path and spend a lot less time describing the alternatives for whatever purpose. But our goal is really to describe alternatives.
Bob?
Based on tonight's discussion, and I had some of these thoughts before, I'm going to alter what I'd suggest for an outline, and someone before the town accountant gets up should sit down and talk about the timeline and why we're here. And it probably should be David, but I'll do it if he can't, or, we can talk about that. To Fred's point, it has been rushed. We all knew that. And the trustees and the building committee voted to do this as fast as humanly possible to get on the April 1st ballot. We had a window of opportunity of 1 day to hold this town meeting. It's Thursday. There was no other option with all the different legal requirements. That was the only way to get a ballot question on to April 1st. So, given the fact that this news all came out on January 26th, or whenever the financial forum was.
29th. Yeah.
29th, okay. I had the library trustees scheduled in March to come in and give the selectmen an update on the project. That's how much I knew as to the timing of all this. So I was very happy to find out that you had numbers on January 29th, but I certainly wasn't expecting it. And Ruth told me about a week before, yeah, we'll have numbers. I was like, that's great. So it's been a rush planning process because there's a need to be in a hurry.
Yep.
We have temporary space to discuss.
Yep.
We have construction inflation to discuss. There are reasons to be in a hurry. We all need to understand that, and it doesn't need to be a negative. It just needs to be, hey, we drew together all the facts as fast as we could. We're going at a schedule a little faster than certainly I would have planned. I would have said you're going to an annual town meeting, and then we'll have a special election. But the trustees and the building committee voted to do it sooner if possible. And it is possible with no margin of error. So it is a rushed process. I acknowledge that, everyone should. But there's a reason to do it that way. The project is going to be much easier to accomplish if we get the news as fast as we can, whatever the news is.
So Bob,
But someone should go up, I think, before any of the other discussion starts and say, this is why we're here tonight. This is a timeline.
I think it should,
I'll do it.
thank you. I
It's a
think
matter of
it
public
should be-
record anyway. It's
Right.
not a.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ma'am?
Rachel Baumgartner, I'm on the building committee. I think also should be included that the state does not have any plans for further grants for libraries at this point, and there are 20 towns on the waiting list below us, so that financial assistance from the state is extremely unlikely for years to come.
Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate that. Dan?
Bob, I want to ask you a what-if question, and this might actually affect what we close on the warrant in 2 weeks. Let's say a debt exclusion
Excuse me.
override approved by town meeting, goes to the voters and fails. And then would Andrew's position be a fallback at the annual town meeting, namely to look at debt inside the cap?
The way I was going to approach that, for better or worse,
Yeah.
was if that happens, to probably try to hold a special town meeting inside the annual to deal
Okay.
with alternatives.
Yeah.
I don't know that we want to draw
Yeah, 'cause
attention to
you
the
might-
failure by having an
Yeah, yeah,
article
yeah,
sort of
that's
as a placeholder.
Right.
But we could do that, but
I think that's a
that'd be
better
another
idea.
fire drill.
Yeah.
April 1st.
That gives you more
3 weeks.
time. We've done specials inside annuals before.
But we might be doing inside the one-night annual, so
That's a 2-week planning period.
we might be kind of in a hurry, but
If we
it's,
need to
it's.
do a special, it's probably not a one-night
No,
town meeting
it
any
won't be.
longer.
You're right,
Yeah.
which would be fine.
And if we don't get quorum on Thursday night, the alternative, the fallback, is a
Special town meeting.
request for this board to put it on the,
I'll have to get some legal advice from bond counsel and town council, but you will most likely have to take some action on February 25th at your next meeting, if you want it to be on the ballot.
Right.
Citizens can do it. I think it's 50 signatures, I'm not
Oh,
sure.
really?
Yeah.
You can petition stuff on the,
Mhm.
oh,
You can.
Another door.
I like that.
So I don't know the number, I'm saying 50, but that might not be enough.
The board has not been in
But
favor of
it's-
that in
I haven't
the
heard-
past, but
I'm
it
not
is,
worried
It's, I
about
think,
provision number.
35 days in advance of the election,
the board has not been in
which
favor of
is
that.
coming up pretty soon. I think February 25th hits that, but not much more. And if it misses by a day, I'll have to figure that out. You know, there's too many moving parts and too many possibilities. I've been trying to think of as many as possible. I think the real question that the Thursday night has to ask itself is, again, town meeting authorizes debt. I should hope that however we decide to proceed, we get some kind of authorization from town meeting on debt. One possibility, and I would absolutely say you need to have this discussion very publicly, depending on your intentions, is ask the voters to do a debt exclusion. If they say no, there's a plan B of doing debt inside the tax levy or some other way. But I absolutely would not ask the voters, and I'm sure you'd agree, support this thing, and then later say, well, you didn't support it, we're gonna do it another way.
Right.
They gotta know that.
Yeah,
And if they know that, that gives them a reason to say no, quite honestly.
it does.
So, you know, you gotta be clear, I think, to the voters, if you vote no, this is what it means. It either means we're doing it anyways, or there's no project. There's no other choice.
Okay. So that's, brings us full circle. Thank you, healthy
Thank you.
discussion, great input, some things that I wasn't aware of. Appreciate it.
I have one other quickie, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Bob, in the context of this discussion, will the financials be revolving around just the incremental amount, or will it treat the project as a whole and reflect on the total project? The distinction is, for those who haven't been necessarily paying attention walking in, it's easy to get confused about the project versus the incremental project. I know we've all got it here, but for those
Yeah,
on TV not hearing it.
I think it's a given that this part up here is done and been approved by the voters.
Right.
If the project continues, that's gonna happen. I don't think that needs to be a big focus of Thursday night. I think the focus is really, we need more money, how do we get more money? By the same token, going to the voters, you're not asking them for the whole project, they've already approved, you know, the first chunk of it. You're just asking them for whatever additional money is decided.
So,
I'd
Andrew,
just like to raise one quick sort of option. When you talk about sort of Plan B, you know, the library trustees haven't really talked in detail about the plan. We've talked to the architects about some of the things you could do, but I mean, one thing that I see as a possibility, and what makes it hard to sort of turn this into a up or down vote on the whole project, is maybe town meeting wouldn't be comfortable with the full $3.5 million being inside the levy. If we go to townwide election and it doesn't pass, if you set that up as sort of, if you vote this down, then we're killing the whole thing.
Yeah.
The town meeting comes back and says, well, wait, we could have, you know, we'd have been comfortable with $2 million inside the levy. And if we can get the architects to come back to $2 million, or 1.5, or 1, why did you kill the whole thing?
Yeah.
If, you know, all you need was, if we can really squeeze the architects and you push hard and you raise some money, we could have done the thing for $1 million or $1.5 million. So it's sort of like, if Plan B is pushing back, you know, take off the turrets, don't do some windows, you know, whatever little level of slicing you need to get to what town meeting and FinCom is comfortable with spending, we just don't know exactly what it is, the number that we need to meet for Plan B. So the sort of the special town meeting within town meeting could be this debate of, okay, the voters didn't support the full $3.5 million. We've got $5 million coming from the state. We want to do something. You know, what's the middle ground here? Where are we going to end up? And it may not be all, it may not be nothing. It might be something in between. And I think that's why it's sort of hard to come up with what exactly is Plan B. It's what we can work out with town meeting if this doesn't pass.
I would have expected us, though, to go back to the architects and ask them what are the, like, where can we push it? What are those options so we could have some data to present to town meeting?
Well, then, I mean, there's some obvious things. You don't have to do the turrets. But it's sort of, we don't know exactly what you can shave off before you get in trouble with the state. So it's hard to sort of say exactly which pieces you're going to take off before you get in trouble.
But you're putting that on us to then answer the question, either by describing what funding we might tolerate, not me, but
Well,
the politic as a whole. That's almost, you guys really, in my opinion, ought to think about the obvious alternatives, whether they're structural or stuff that might be deferred and taken up later.
yep.
To not have any of it done just speaks, not having looked at the alternatives.
Yep.
I can understand there's ambiguity areas that you can't know or maybe unknowable.
Right.
But to have none of it ready just sounds a little
Is-
hollow.
That's
No,
scary.
and I don't mean to say that we'll have none of it ready. We can talk about, making a list of things that aren't absolutely critical. But it's not going to be, this is the plan B. I guess that's the thing, it's just, plan B, shave off $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million, or is it just a list? I don't,
Yeah, and I agree. I don't think you have to, put up, here's our alternative.
yeah.
But at least have an answer to the question, right? Saying, look,
Right.
we looked into it,
Right.
At least show that you did some due diligence. Say, look, we looked into it, and here's some thoughts that we had, just as we did before when you first dropped $1.5 million. You were going to forego furniture, you were going to forego, we've thought of these things, and here's why we're sticking with our
Right.
plan.
And that's
Is
the
that
same
still an
list.
option for us?
It would go back to that
Absolutely.
same list, yeah.
Right. And that's all we're asking. But
Yeah.
to stand up to 150 people to say, Plan B, no. It's, this is what we're presenting to you, and so you're going to get an up, down vote.
Yep. I guess that it's just sort of, some people seem to really want, okay, if this doesn't pass, then there's this rock solid crystal plan B. I view it more as sort of, we come back to town and say, well, here's the shopping, we didn't get this, here's your list, you can shave this much off, or you can shave that much off, what are you comfortable with?
Okay. Two more things, and you guys purposely killed my 10 o'clock time.
Sorry, it's important.
It is
So
important.
one thing that I think is really important, Andrew, is we asked, what's Plan B? And we saw a bunch of heads saying, no, there isn't one. That can't be the thing that you come into town meeting with, because the impression I have with the library at the moment is, we want this is what we want, we won't do anything less. And that's the way that
Yeah, I
town meeting
understand.
thinks as well. And so the presentation you do needs to counter that impression people have, that we won't compromise, we have to do it, it has to be done this way, and that's why we need an extra $4 million, which is almost the $5 million we're getting from the state. So there is definitely a real need to be very crisp and clear with your message to town meeting, because there's a very real possibility
The optics here are not good.
people are going to say, no, I'm sorry, this doesn't make sense.
Right.
So
And you should have a good understanding of what the state would not approve.
Right.
When you submitted your application and to get the 5 million, your submittal was 10.5 million, okay? And now we've gone up to 4.9, and there's no way that was due to construction cost increases.
Jim, I can kind of go through the phasing of that if you want to just brief. I've said about 3 of these meetings now. The original estimate, you guys jump in, 2010, I believe, when the grant application became available, a number of town employees, professionals sat down. This was not a professional team. There was a project manager, I think, hired for about $20K and an architect for $45. They put a schematic plan together.
Yeah.
That was sufficient to put in for the grant, which was then awarded in 2012. At that point, the numbers were updated using inflation,
Yeah.
but not the kind of in-depth drill down that they've now been able to do. Once the architect came on board, or got close to being on board at the latter part of 2013, they actually worked at risk to start developing some preliminary designs. Then they really went gangbusters in December and produced the schematic. You see them, that diagram there with the exploded floors, et cetera. They needed that to do the detailed costing and to determine the scope of investigations. They'd have to do the destructive testing in January to drill the walls, floors, et cetera. So they took that design, fully costed out. They went even beyond the original costing. And that has now produced what I think is much more solid numbers. So
No, I agree.
Up
and
until
I
this
like
point,
that.
when you spent the big money, like laid out the $1 million for the design and the costing, to some degree, these problems are unknowable. And given the degree to which we put the detail in 2010. I think it's, to me now, it's much more understandable how we got to where we are. And I think a lot of good faith has been shown by the library trustees here.
I agree,
and-
but
and
people
a
are
lot of
going,
hard work.
people are
yeah.
going to have a hard time, Dan, seeing, no matter how you outline it like that.
I think
that-
David
that-
will do that well. I
that
heard him do it the other night.
The project from submittal
Yeah.
of 10 million is
Right.
now up to 19 million, and
Say it differently, should the project have been submitted at, pick a number, 15 or 17 or 14?
Perhaps. I don't know. They can explain that. But I'm telling you, that's the progression.
right,
And just to be fair, that's a completely unfair question, to go back now, 7 years later, and say, oh, you should have done it differently. This is the process that it was done. And this is the way that, in 2020 hindsight, maybe the question is, should you have spent $500,000 to get a really solid number back then, instead of the way we did it, which was spend 50 grand to get this, like,
50 grand to get 5 million.
and that's,
Not a bad ROI.
yeah.
Mm.
I mean, to go back and say, oh, wait, I think you should have done your process differently 7 years ago is, I mean, we can talk about whether the town should change their building process in the future.
no,
But
that's
this was
right,
the way-
that's exactly right. No,
This is
that's
the
not
way
the
it was
library
done at the
issue,
time.
that's a town, that's a
Yeah.
town. Bob?
To that point, Barry is going to propose some kind of instructional motion under Article 2. Today, when I found that out, I asked the moderator if he would accept that in order, not out of order. He usually does it at the end of town meeting. I said, I think in this case, from what I understand Barry's going to suggest, it would be helpful to get this part of the discussion out early so that the problem about what's the future hold for building projects is put aside. And we don't worry about how we got here. We understand that it wasn't perfect. I'm more an advocate of spending more money up front and getting better information, but we're also in a position to do that, not every town is. And to just sort of set aside some of that rancor and say, look, we understand we didn't have a perfect process. It's nobody's fault. Let's fix the process with an instructional motion, and let's deal with that part later.
Right.
Now let's deal with the issue that's in front of us, and we'll go to town on that.
Yeah.
And the only thing I would suggest for the library to have available is, forgetting contingency, which is kind of a big gray area, if you need $3.5 million and you don't get it, and you can cut $3.5 million out, be very clear with all of us, well, I'll make up a number. $3 million of that is stuff you're gonna have to pay for eventually. It's furniture you're gonna have to buy, you're gonna have to do windows, you're gonna have to do roofs, whatever it is. But here's stuff that's truly optional. It's design, it's not something that's gonna come back and cost money. If there's any way for you to get a handle on that, that's the information that would be useful, because if town meeting if it's clear to town meeting, look, you're gonna have to pay for X number of this $3.5 million anyways, one way or the other, over some period of time. And you made an excellent point that I don't know the answer, and it's unknowable, but there's some amount of money we'd spend on the building if we don't do anything for some period of time. That's not currently in the capital plan. I don't know what that number is either, but it's absolutely a fair point.
Mr., Rachel, Mark, Ruth.
I think at our January 16th building committee meeting, Bob, you suggested that if we have to take this to town meeting, we include everything.
Absolutely.
Is that not correct?
Yep.
So that's where the $3.5 million came from, was putting in all of the stuff.
Right.
Mhm.
And I think we had a number, I'm not exactly sure what it was, but there was a number that was slightly less than that at that time.
Yeah, I believe you shouldn't do things that would cut it out now and put it in, through the facilities capital plan in 5
Right.
years. I thought
Right.
everyone deserved to have the discussion about, this is the building that the library really wants. This is what it costs. But you have to be ready to have the other discussion, and to, I guess, James's point, Plan B is, okay, we get it another way, whether you like it or not, we're gonna have to be asking for capital to do all these other things. So we do the first $15 million worth of work. We cut out some things that should be done in the project, but okay, we won't do them. We'll replace all the windows in 3 years, or in 7 years. It's gonna cost, whatever, $180,000. We won't do the roof now. We'll spend $250,000 in 2 years. those are all terrible ideas, which is why I think you need to present the project as it is. But the fact of the matter is, if you build a library and you don't build a new roof, you're gonna need the roof someday.
This is what
It
happened.
really
We've
is
had
not an
no roof
option
on this
to
project
leave off.
before, too.
But that's exactly what happened in 1984. I mean, they did
Yeah.
it for under $1
Right.
million,
Totally cheap.
and now we're paying the price for
Right.
everything.
Which is
that
why I
has been
think
done.
you gotta not worry about what it costs and do the right thing. This is the right thing. Oh, by the way, this is what it cost. I'm sorry for the number, but it's the right thing. And then let's hope we don't get into this little, cut this out, cut that out.
Right. Just try to help you with the messaging. Okay. Sir?
Paul Sylvester, Precinct 3. I understand this is a difficult issue, and I've been going to a lot of the meetings and trying to, make sure that I'm as objective as I possibly can be. And I'll tell you, I'm scared about Thursday night. And the perception that I get, and I wonder if the rest of the town meeting is gonna get it, is that we are really scrambling around. FinCom is gonna meet at 6:30, town meeting's looking for, solid, recommendations in terms of what the options are. And, if we get that snowstorm on Thursday, and it's heavier than we expect, we may really be looking at the perfect storm for the library. So I guess I would say is I hear what Bob is saying, and from my standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to me. But I also know that we need to consider that our citizens are going to have to pay for this above and beyond. And we need to seriously look at where the economy is right now. We've talked about options and whatever else and what it might cost. We really haven't heard much discussion as to whether or not can citizens of Reading, actually afford it. And remember, yes, we as a town have already agreed to, the major chunk of it last year. And possibly that will get spent, but we really do need to look at the whole big picture and say, this is what it's gonna cost us in light of the other, projects that are also coming. So I guess, I'm working through my own feelings of unease that we just don't seem to have, all our ducks in line. With less than 48 hours to go to the meeting, and we're talking about strategy of what the library, might consider presenting to town meeting. And yeah, to be doing tweaks at this phase seems perfectly fine. To be discussing major strategy makes me just a little bit nervous. So one of the things I'd like to understand better is, so what are the timeline options? So for example, if this doesn't go through and we need to go to the voters or whatever, as a town meeting member, you know what? If I had to come back in 3 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever else, and that was the right thing to do to look at, other things, I'm there. It's the library is an important enough thing and an asset or whatever else, and I'm willing to do that. And maybe even if the town had to pay some extra money for a special election, it might be worth it for us to do that if that's necessary.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So we are not going to take.
I would not
any
make a
position
motion.
on-
I think we can decide what we want to do, given that we're posted for Thursday.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So, everybody in agreement?
Makes sense to me.
So, with that, we are going to, that's it for the warrant, that
Yeah, for the
is
warrant.
closed.
Thanks, everybody.
We have 4 sets of minutes to approve, and then we need to go into executive session.
Move the Board of Selectmen approve the minutes of October 22nd, 2013 as amended.
Second?
There, I actually, sorry, did have a couple things on that, I think. No, actually, I'm abstaining on that one.
Okay.
Okay, so the vote is 301. Sorry, that's your call. Will the Board of Selectmen approve the minutes?
Well, actually, can I have a vote on approving the minutes?
Move that the Board of Selectmen approve the
October.
October.
Yeah, which we have, so it's a 301.
Right.
I didn't see Mr. Reed's
Oh,
hands.
You
okay.
you want to take over? Go ahead.
I'm just
Oh, no,
acting
I thought,
secretary.
sorry.
Well, because I didn't know if John was abstaining as well. But, by the way, you
Well,
don't
then you
have
had
to
to roll.
approve the minutes.
I don't have
Even
to
though-
have been there, I realize that, I just don't feel comfortable.
I understand that, but then it runs
Right.
into issue if I only have a two approved.
Sure.
Yeah, I was not at the meeting, but I.
So,
Right.
This vote to approve.
How about to approve it?
thank you.
We all set on October 22nd?
Yes.
Will the Board of Selectmen approve the minutes of December 17th, 2013 as amended?
Second.
Just two things, Jane Parento's name, last name, I believe needs to be spelled a little differently.
Whose
That's
name?
on page 2, Jane Parento, she was there from, was from the RMLD.
Parenteau.
Right, and it's missing
Alright.
the U at the end,
Okay.
but if you could just fix that.
French Canadians get no
Oh, okay.
respect.
Yes.
Instead of another, yeah. So, okay, that's it.
Is it?
Yep.
4-0, approving as amended.
Move the Board of Selectmen approve the minutes of January 14th, 2014 as amended.
Second. Discussion? None appearing, all in favor? 4-0.
Move the Board of Selectmen approve the minutes of January 21st, 2014 as amended.
Second.
Second.
No discussion?
No discussion.
4-0.
Move to go in executive session to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining, and that the chair declares that an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the body, and not to reconvene an open session.
Second,
Marcy?
yes.
John?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
James, yes. Good night, everybody. See you Thursday night.
Let me just stay here.